The Falcon and the Winter Soldier boldly flies far above most of the content Marvel has produced to date. It does so not in its action, which is on a far smaller scale than even Spider-Man movies, nor in its plot, which ultimately boils down to just another bad guy wanting to kill some hostages. No, where Falcon and the Winter Soldier excels is in how it uses its theme and characters to tackle political issues that are deeply relevant to our world today. In tackling such issues, it does something no other Marvel property, except Black Panther, has done before. But through the lens of a 6-hour miniseries, it's able to commit a lot more of its running time to these issues than if it were yet another 2-hour-long movie. And the thing is, it doesn't excel just because it is a political series. Rather, the way it tackles political issues means that it gives both the viewer and its characters a chance to reflect on the worlds they live in, the errors of the past, and how we can move forward. The way it does so is through the power of symbolism.
I don't know if there's ever been a greater symbol.
In using Captain America's shield as a symbol to represent America, the show tackles headfirst the weight that such a symbol would carry. Through its two primary wielders in the series, we are shown two very different interpretations of what America means, and neither interpretation is free from a legacy built on violence and oppression. There is no changing the past, but how the shield moves forward is what truly matters. And it's that ideological battle that comes to a head in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. In having a message and exploring it well through the lens of symbolism, the series pushed the boundaries of what was allowed under corporate storytelling to the very limit. And it's probably because of Disney that it wasn't allowed to explore many of the issues it raises in too much depth.
The desire to become a superhuman cannot be separated from supremacist ideals.
So it chose a broader approach, using the symbol of two competing Captain Americas to explore a wide variety of political issues. It briefly bubbles them to the surface, allowing just enough time for the viewer to consider the meaning, and then someone has to punch someone else. This is a superhero show, after all. But what are these two takes on America? What does the shield represent, and how does it change based on who is carrying it? The series uses the character of John Walker to make a point from the very start. When Sam hands in Cap's shield, he is told by an unnamed US senator,
"Thanks again for coming forward with the shield, Sam. It was the right decision."
But it doesn't take long for that very same senator to then hand the shield to a white man with blonde hair and blue eyes, presenting him to the world as the government-approved version of Captain America.
A white man? No!
Whether the senator did this consciously or not, the result is the same. A black man not being Captain America was the right thing, and America wants to present itself to the world through this white soldier. And that soldier part of white soldier is also important. Modern America is using Captain America to project an image, that of a military superpower, the world police, and John Walker's Cap is to be their chief enforcer. His role is as much to be a part of a global propaganda machine as it is to go on missions to fight the ideological opponents of America. His being used as American military propaganda is something the characters in the show deliberately point out at several intervals.
Star Spangled Man with a plan and all that. It's always been in the job description.
He accepts this as part of his job, but this contrasts heavily with Steve Rogers, who rejected the propaganda tours running off to help fight a war against literal Nazis. In many ways, Steve showcased the most idealized version of what America represents. He didn't blindly follow orders, instead he always did what was right. He was a good man, and he didn't want to kill anyone. He just didn't like bullies.
I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from.
In the same episode where a flag smasher admits he was a fan of that idealized America, the one that fought Nazis.
And he fought Nazis, so...
The show very quickly contrasts this idealized representation with the modern American reality. John Walker attacks people in foreign countries. He murders someone and calls it justice, and in a moment that will remind viewers of the fact that the American NSA literally wiretapped and monitored almost everyone on the planet, he hacks into Falcon's drone to figure out where he is.
Jack, you're Red Wing.
You hacked my tech?
Not only that, but when he is caught on camera, again, murdering someone, he's given a slap on the wrist for show. He is stripped of the Captain America title, but that's all. He doesn't face any jail time or any kind of significant justice for killing another human being who had already surrendered. Worst of all, he's actually right when he defends himself by saying,
I only ever did what you asked of me, what you told me to be and trained me to do, and I did it. And I did it well.
He did do exactly what they trained him to do. They're only upset because he got caught doing it on camera. The show demonstrates this later by having the government rehire John Walker, giving him a new position and a new suit. He'll now work as the US agent, still killing in the name of America, but from the shadows, where the damage he's doing is much less obvious. And it's that aggressive, shadowy, interventionist America that John Walker represents. The one that enters countries in the name of freedom, but most often brings death. The one that can oust democratically elected governments in the name of fighting socialism. And the one that is literally right now helping Saudi Arabia fight a war in Yemen where the collateral damage is so bad it would make fictional Sokovia look like a small fireworks show. That is the America John Walker represents. Through this lens, the series also shows us how modern America deals with the people left behind in the wake of their collateral damage. In the case of the series, it's dealing with the aftermath of the blip. People are being forced into camps or sent back to the countries they were born in, even if they have no lives, property, or family waiting for them there. The parallels in our world could be anything from the global economic inequality that is perpetuated by the richer nations, the consequences of war and the climate crisis, or even simply good old-fashioned religious persecution. The America that Walker stands for often uses terms like refugees or illegal immigrants or economic migrants to remove from themselves any duty of care that they would have for these fellow human beings. But these people have literally nowhere else to go. They have no home to be repatriated to, and the show directly addresses this when Sam uses the term refugees.
Do you know a woman by the name of Doña Madani? She was a refugee here.
We're not refugees, for we have nothing to seek refuge from. We're internationally displaced persons, for what it's worth.
Displaced persons as a term far more adequately describes the plight of these, again, fellow human beings. There is nowhere for them to go, and sending them back to where they came from would be tantamount to a death sentence. Which is why the Flag Smashers believe they have no choice but to act when the GRC decides it will pass a law that's going to do exactly that. The series goes to great pains to show us that their grievances against the wealthy nations of the world are not wrong, and that is something that Sam Wilson addresses when he becomes the new Captain America.
These labels, terrorist, refugee, thug, they're often used to get around the question why.
He embodies an idea of America that is altogether different to John Walker's, but one that is still deeply rooted in a bloody past. A past that is too often left undiscussed by our modern history books.
They will never let a black man be Captain America. No self-respecting black man would ever want to be.
Those are the words spoken by Isaiah Bradley when he is talking to Sam about the legacy of the shield, the symbol the series uses to examine America.
Those stars and stripes don't mean nothing good to me.
The reasons why he feels this way are explored in several scenes throughout the show, with each highlighting America's history of racial injustice more and more. And a lot of it is recent history. Yes, slavery gets a mention when Sam says,
We built this country. Bled for it. I'm not gonna let anybody tell me I can't fight for it.
the show acknowledges that past, but America's sins against its black citizens continue to this day, and Isaiah Bradley and Sam Wilson are used to showcase just how pervasive these sins are. Sam's modern American experience is still defined by his being a black man, even though he's literally a superhero who saved the world. A bank teller refuses to give him a loan, and then has the audacity to ask for an autograph. And then cops harass him when he's on the street with Bucky.
No, he's not bothering me.
And, as last year made abundantly clear to literally every person around the world, if they hadn't recognized him as a celebrity, that interaction with those cops could have ended very differently. Meanwhile, Isaiah is a vehicle through which the series explores the very recent and often whitewashed history of racism in America. He mentions the Red Tails. These were a real-life group of black Air Force servicemen who fought for the US in World War II. Not only did they fight, but they were remarkably successful, winning a whole host of awards and medals for their efforts. However, when they returned home, according to the CAF Rise Above Foundation that works to educate people on their accomplishments, German prisoners of war were treated better than black Americans. And, as is mentioned by Isaiah,
only to come home to find crosses burned on their lawn.
They fought for their country and came back to a racist, segregated society that treated German Nazis better than its own black citizens. Meanwhile, the experiments performed on Isaiah and his fellow soldiers, the ones where they were given an experimental super soldier serum, told it was a tetanus shot, and most of them died, are intentionally reminiscent of real-world horrific actions taken by the US government. These actions were part of a study that's often referred to as the Tuskegee experiment. And it's one that's weirdly, surprisingly, not really taught in history classes, or certainly not with any depth. Or as Isaiah puts it, in reference to his own suffering,
They erase me, my history. But they've been doing that for 500 years.
So what was the Tuskegee experiment? Well, over the course of 40 years, black African-American men were told they would be treated for having bad blood, and that this would be an experimental treatment. What they actually had was syphilis, but they were never even told that basic information. No, they just kept going to these doctors and getting treatment for their bad blood. It turns out, though, that these treatments weren't actually anything. They weren't receiving any medicine. The study's true purpose was to study the long-term effects of syphilis if left untreated. What is especially fucking evil about this experiment is that over the course of those 4 decades, there were several periods of time where any of those experiment subjects could have received treatment for their syphilis and either not died or at least significantly improved their quality of life. During World War II, if they had been enlisted, they would have been diagnosed as part of their medical checkup and given the treatments that were available at that time. So what did the people who ran the experiment do? Well, they stopped those men from joining the military. A few years after that, penicillin is revealed as being a, if not cure, then amazing treatment for syphilis. Instead of celebrating and giving that treatment to these experiment subjects, the people running the experiment, again, intentionally kept the subjects in the dark as to what it was they were suffering from and did not give them that life-saving penicillin. In the end, 128 men died of syphilis or its related complications. 40 of their wives were infected because they were never told they had to do anything to protect themselves, and as a result of that, 19 of their children were born with congenital syphilis. But it wasn't only the people who suffered from the experiment who experienced consequences. When the truth about the experiment came out, it of course led to massive mistrust in black communities of both the government and doctors and medicine. As soon as the report came out, the life expectancy of black men in America fell by 1.4 years. Like that. And that's why to this day some black communities in America show higher levels of vaccine hesitancy. Wouldn't you? Because this is a community of people that the US government was comfortable lying to about getting a treatment for a disease. Then they were not treating that disease, and instead they let that disease run rampant in that same community. In a coincidental tying back to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, an article from McGill University about this whitewashed part of American history concludes with the following paragraph. We know all about evil Nazis who experimented on prisoners. We condemn the scientists in Marvel movies who carry out tests on prisoners of war. But we do well to remember that America has also used its own people as lab rats. Yet to this day, no one has been prosecuted for their role in dooming 399 men to syphilis. That's right. No one was ever prosecuted or faced any consequences for this experiment, this crime against humanity. And because of it being this crime against humanity, it seems it's a part of its own history that America would like to forget. So if you want to learn more about this or any of the other real-world issues I've cited in this video, they're all linked down below. Because America is not the good guy. By echoing these crimes against humanity perpetrated by the country that Cap's shield represents, the show makes a really good case for why no self-respecting black man would pick up that shield. Why would Sam wear the symbol of a country that treated soldiers who looked like him worse than literal Nazis? Why carry a shield that carries the weight of centuries of racist violence and abuse? Even Sam admits that
every time I pick this thing up, I know there are millions of people out there who are going to hate me for it.
But he becomes Captain America anyway. And the only way he can feel comfortable doing so is by shining a light on the pain still felt in America to this day. He doesn't want to ignore or erase history. Instead, through his speech and the Isaiah exhibit, he acknowledges the hurt of the past and of the present. He shines a light on it and commits himself and tries to commit the politicians at the end to doing better.
The only power I have is that I believe we can do better.
He can't control what they will do, but he can lead by example. He can be the Captain America that fights to make the world better, even if it's just one person at a time, and even if that involves America itself dealing with uncomfortable truths about its racist and violent past. This commitment to being better and taking steps to solve America's many, many issues is met by a familiar phrase from the unnamed politician.
You have no idea how complicated this situation is.
And while Sam agrees that solutions to long-term problems may be complex, he counters this by focusing on how those problems affect people in their day-to-day lives. Through the blip, and in our world through COVID, he says that everyone, no matter where they're from or just how rich they are, understands how it feels to suddenly be helpless, to be affected so wholly by something that is totally out of their control.
How did it feel to be helpless? Now, if you could remember what it was like to be helpless, you would know that you're about to have the exact same impact.
Sam says that this is the perspective those privileged rich politicians, who have already recovered from either the blip or COVID, should keep in mind.
We finally have a common struggle now. Think about that. You've got to do better, Senator. You've got to step up. Because if you don't, the next Carly will.
The show uses the example of world hunger.
You can feed 1 million people phone call.
While yes, it may take decades to solve the centuries-old legacy of imperialism which has led to massive global inequality, the practicality of making sure everyone in the world has food could be solved much faster. If there was truly political will behind solving world hunger, we could feed everyone on the planet tomorrow and work on fixing the broader systemic issues over time. He even agrees with the motivations driving the series' villain.
I mean, this girl died trying to stop you. And no one has stopped for 1 second to ask why.
It's not that the Flag Smashers are ideologically wrong, he says, they just probably shouldn't blow people up. And if the politicians do not act to solve the issues the Flag Smashers raised, then there will be another Carly Morgenthau in no time at all. In essence, Sam argues that taking compassionate and direct action will go a long way further than simply sitting around a table and discussing complex issues ad infinitum. Discussing complexities while taking no action only reinforces the status quo, but achieving new humanitarian objectives every single day can only help to make the world a better place for everyone.
You people have just as much power as an insane god or a misguided teenager. The question you have to ask yourself is, how are you going to use it?
It's a humanist point of view that values every life, whether they're from America or not. Ultimately, Sam chooses to fight for those idealized values of America. Values that stand for the rights of all people to have life, liberty, and happiness. Values that don't want to kill anyone, they just don't like bullies. But Sam also acknowledges that the only way to do that honestly is to reveal injustice, even if doing so isn't easy. Through Sam and his symbolic representation of America, the series is saying that America can live up to its ideal, one step at a time, by trying to be better. But it must also confront its past and make amends for its horrific actions and racist structures. Because for things to change, you first need to admit that there's something wrong. The people running the Falcon and the Winter Soldier admitted that the COVID breakout obviously slowed their production and meant they had to pivot their story somewhat. But what is odd is that it ultimately made the final speech Sam gives about us all knowing how it feels to be helpless appropriate, whether we were fictional characters living in the Marvel universe who experienced the blip, or real-world people in our world who experienced COVID and are still suffering its consequences globally. In a way, it made that final speech much more powerful because we also all know what it's like to suddenly be helpless. Wherever we were around the world, our lives are different now than they would have been if COVID hadn't happened. But was it a coincidence? Or did Disney plan it all along to increase their brand synergy between Marvel's world and our world? I'm not saying they've done it. I'm not even alleging they've done it. But could they have done it? It's a conspiracy that goes all the way to the Mickey Mouse top. They've actually lost so much revenue off not releasing movies. But then they gained so much revenue because we were all stuck inside and had to get Disney Plus. More investigation must be undertaken. And if you want to support such an investigation, subscribe below. Support me on Patreon. I am doing the work of an investigative journalist, and I will find out once and for all if it was Mickey Mouse who developed COVID. But also, if you support me on Patreon, you get your name in the credits. The ones that just came by before, so do that. And also, I'm really losing ad revenue by talking about these political things in the art we consume. So, like, support me for that. And just give me... Please give me money. Please.